Welcome to today's Explainer. Right now, we're tackling a financial concept that absolutely shatters conventional wisdom. It's a topic that literally splits investors into fiercely loyal, warring camps, and it all revolves around this really fascinating central mathematical paradox. We're talking about dividends. Now, we've all been conditioned to believe that living off dividend yields is the ultimate financial endgame, right? But here is the paradox. Actively chasing yield can mathematically sabotage your net worth during your peak earning years. And yet, those exact same dividends might be the very thing that saves you from a total financial meltdown in retirement. So, here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We're going to cover 1, the great dividend debate, 2, the accumulation tax drag, 3, the dangerous yield trap, 4, the math of retirement, and finally, 5, your 3-phase action plan.
I absolutely love this quote because it sets the perfect philosophical tone for us today. Capital appreciation is growing the trunk of the tree. Dividends are picking the apples. I want you to keep this apple orchard metaphor in the back of your mind as we go through this, because how we view building the tree versus harvesting its fruit, that is the absolute key to mastering your wealth across the different temporal phases of your life.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the great dividend debate. You know, the financial world right now is completely split into two deeply entrenched camps. On one side, we've got the traditionalists. They preach the gospel of yield. And why? Because they're desperately trying to recreate this extinct financial creature, the corporate pension. They basically just want the safety of a recurring check so they never have to watch their share count drop. But then, on the other side, we have the modern academic camp. They argue that total return is literally the only metric that matters. But we have to remember, this camp is largely a product of a massive zero-interest tech bull market. They look at a 3% yield as this archaic, unnecessary drag on growth. The crazy truth here, they are both mathematically right but temporally wrong. You have to use the right tool at the exact right time in your life.
Which brings us to Section 2, the accumulation tax drag.
Okay, if you ignore the actual tax friction of dividends during your peak earning years, you are going to lose an absolute fortune. Let's break down the math on this. Imagine a hypothetical $500,000 portfolio held over 20 years. Asset A is pure growth, delivering a 10% annualized capital appreciation. Asset B has the exact same 10% underlying return, but it's split into 5% appreciation and a 5% dividend yield. On paper, they seem totally identical, right? But the very second that dividend cash hits your taxable account, the government swoops in to take their cut. Assuming a blended 25% tax drag on your yield, that 5% dividend drops to a 3.75% after-tax yield to reinvest. So your actual compounding rate on Asset B drops to 8.75%. Fast forward 20 years, and Asset A grows tax-deferred to roughly $3.36 million. Asset B, it only reaches $2.67 million. Just let this staggering number sink in for a second. $687,000. That is the exact amount of net worth lost to invisible tax friction and lost compounding momentum over those 20 years. Receiving dividends in a taxable accumulation account is essentially a forced taxable liquidation. The government is literally taxing your momentum. That $687,000 difference, that is roughly 1.5 entire compounding cycles, just poof, gone. Moving on to Section 3. The dangerous yield trap. Now, when everyday investors realize their growth is lagging behind, they often do something incredibly destructive. They try to compensate by chasing these crazy double-digit yields. We're talking 10 to 15%, often in closed-end funds. And this is so dangerous. Think about a declining net asset value, or NAV. If a fund pays a 12% yield, but its net asset value decays by 4% annually, that fund is literally funding your dividend by returning your own capital back to you. It's called destructive return of capital. You put in $100,000. By year 1, your principal drops to $96,000. By year 5, it drops to $81,500. Your cash flow shrinks as your principal just vaporizes. It's basically a magic trick where the fund managers hand you a $20 bill straight out of your own wallet, and they expect you to applaud while you're getting poorer every single year. So why on earth do highly intelligent people fall for this? Well, it boils down to behavioral economics. Specifically, it's a concept coined by Richard Thaler called mental accounting. Basically, humans have this weird tendency to treat money differently based entirely on its origin. Investors view capital appreciation as sacred, right? Untouchable. But they view dividends as spendable, safe income. Mathematically speaking, economic theorems prove that a dollar of value is just a dollar of value, whether it comes from growth or yield. But psychologically, selling a share of stock feels like a literal amputation. while cashing a dividend check feels like a harvest. People are gladly paying an invisible tax penalty just for the quarterly dopamine hit of physical proof that the system is working. All right, let's look at Section 4, the math of retirement. Here's where we flip the script. The very moment you stop working, the game theory entirely changes. You are no longer fighting tax drag, you have a brand new enemy called sequence of returns risk. This is the danger of experiencing a major market crash early in your retirement. If you're a pure growth investor who needs to pull out a set amount of cash just to live, and the market suddenly drops 20%, your pure growth portfolio instantly becomes emotionally and mathematically fragile. Think about how these two different strategies react when disaster actually strikes. The pure growth investor needs, say, $40,000 to survive during that 20% crash. They are forced to liquidate shares at a massive discount. They enter this terrible death spiral. They have fewer shares to capture the eventual recovery. And human psychology inevitably kicks in. They panic sell. But contrast that with a dividend income investor. When the market drops 20%, they organically generate that $40,000. 0 shares are sold. The principal value fluctuates, sure, but the actual share count remains completely intact. In retirement, a dividend portfolio acts as a psychological hedge. You are choosing to sacrifice peak theoretical net worth to guarantee behavioral compliance and protect your cash flow engine. Finally, Section 5, your 3-phase action plan. To really optimize your wealth over a lifetime, you've got to compartmentalize your strategy into 3 distinct temporal phases. We have 1, the total return accumulator, 2, the 3-year glide path, and 3, the income floor. Okay, let's dive right into the nuts and bolts of execution here. Phase 1 is your peak earning years. You want 100% broad market growth index funds until you hit your Coast Fire number. That's the point where your existing investments will grow enough to fund your retirement without you having to add another dime. If you really must hold high-yield assets now, keep them strictly in tax-sheltered accounts. Then, Phase 2 kicks in exactly 36 months, roughly 3 years before your planned retirement. This is your glide path. Now, whatever you do not trigger a massive tax bomb by selling all your pure growth stocks. Instead, begin routing all your new incoming capital and reinvested dividends exclusively into income-producing assets to start building your floor. Finally, we hit Phase 3, the income floor. Your singular goal here is to completely nullify sequence of returns risk. Calculate your exact baseline survival numbers, we're talking housing, food, healthcare, and build a yield portfolio that covers exactly that amount. And this is absolutely vital. If you're going to use closed-end funds, you have to run what's called the UNI test. Only buy funds with a positive undistributed net investment income balance. Strictly reject any fund with destructive return of capital. For your extra luxury expenses, just use a hybrid model. Sell your growth shares only when the market happens to be at all-time highs. This brings us full circle back to our opening orchard metaphor. Capital appreciation is growing the trunk of the tree. Dividends are picking the apples. The math determines your top speed, but human psychology determines if you actually finish the race. You want to optimize for growth when you are young and optimize for psychology when you are older. Once your tree is fully grown in retirement, picking the apples is literally the only logical way to feed yourself without chopping down the actual wood to burn for warmth. Which leaves us with one final and honestly super important question for you to chew on. Think about your current portfolio and your current stage of life. Are you picking the apples while your tree is still a sapling? Take a moment to assess your temporal reality, align your mathematical tools, and stop paying invisible taxes for a dopamine hit if you don't actually have to. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.